Spectre is a project I worked on in 2006, and took 2 years in the process till it finalized in the way it is today. In 2006, I was living away from the building. But in the late 90s, I lived in the Yaqubian building, which is the model for this project. And during that period, I was not thinking of making a replica of it, but I was very much wondering about the building itself. And I started doing a lot of research about living somewhere, you know, like specifically in the term dwelling by Heidegger. So basically I was studying the dwelling aspects of those residents at the Yaqubian building. The Yaqubian building is located in the furthest west point of Beirut, in Ras Beirut area, in a neighborhood called Caracas, as in Venezuela, Caracas. It's a huge building. It's a 2-block building. It have more or less about 700 to 800 residents between the 2 blocks. It was designed in the early 60s as a consequence of a law. You know, Beirut in the mid-50s adopted the secret account banking, which enabled Arab investors or regional investors to put their money in accounts in Beirut. So by the late 50s, there was a lot of money in the Beirut banks, which caused the government to start thinking about ways to rotate this money, to circulate it. So one of the laws was invented by the urban planning department was the condominium. It instigated a new kind of buildings, the huge buildings. So one of those buildings was Yaqubian, and the first apartment was sold in 1961 in that building. Of course, it was designed as a modern building with all the modernist aesthetics, oriented towards the middle upper class in Lebanon, which was a cosmopolitan class, by the way. Later on, with time, the civil war started in Beirut, and people started leaving from the building. At that time, they asked relatives to stay in their place, so nobody will occupy the empty apartments. But by 1978, with the Israeli invasion of South Lebanon and the huge migration to Beirut from the south, made things go really chaotic. So a lot of people squatted everywhere, including in the Yaqubian building. At that point, the building started to get confused. You know, it started to not functioning well because it was designed for a different kind of social behavior, let's say. Of course, let's not forget the economical possibilities. You know, if you would need to change the windows, or if you need to retile the bathroom, or things like that were surpassed because sometimes there was no availability of products, or there's not enough money to fix or mend things. So the building started to deteriorate, and its appearance changed. This minimal uniformity of modernism started transferring into a multi-colorful facade with a lot of signs, strange activities inside the building, according to this logic, you know, to the modern logic. It presented a new kind of life, you know, inside the building, which was not made for it. I wanted to put it in a work of art, so it stays, you know. I found it very important to, I don't want to say to archive, but to preserve this 50 or 60 years of the age of the city of Beirut, because it's the period that transformed the city from before and after. Of course, when the concept was cooked and ready to be executed, I started working physically on the project. And the first thing I did, of course, I'm not living in the building anymore, so I don't have the advantage of being an insider. I used to make visits to the building to document it. So I measured. I never went inside the apartments. I worked from the exterior and the outer interior, like corridors and staircases, elevators, but never inside flats. For me, it was enough to work on the transformation of the facades to show what happened. So I did the measurements, and then I went inside. I started photographing all details on every floor. At a point, it got very obsessive. I was like, I wanted to imitate the tiles in the corridors, like the 5 by 5 centimeter tiles. And I designed a way to do so, but then I realized that that will be too much, so I withdrew from that. I didn't do that. I kept it to its minimal, which is basically the concrete made as units that you can line them next to each other and on top of each other. We're talking about 3,000 kilos here, so it needs to be maneuverable. So the basic elements that I worked with to preserve this building as an idea were concrete, aluminum, glass, and that's it. Concrete, aluminum, and glass. I was invited to Sao Paulo Biennale in 2006 to participate, and I was in the midst of working with this building. So I decided to ship it to Sao Paulo to exhibit it at the Biennale. The time of shipping was late June, early July, so it can be in Sao Paulo by September. I was finishing up the final touches on the work before packing it to ship it, and we wake up one day with a 1-month war in Beirut. It was the Israeli attack in July 2006. So the borders were closed, ports were closed, airports were closed. I've decided to go to Sao Paulo, build a replica of the replica, and just put the details on the facade to make it look like the one I'm working on. Of course, at that time I was working on a smaller scale one. So I went to Sao Paulo with all the windows and the doors and all the details. And we worked for like 10 days installing everything on this wooden chassis that was hollow from the inside and very full of details from the outside. Later on, when I came back to Beirut, I decided to put aside the smaller version and rework the whole thing on a larger scale. Of course, by then it changed. It became more solid, more opaque. It's like, okay, you see through the windows, but there is a lot of solidness between, and it was heavier and larger, so it gave a better impression. The main reason to do the work was about transformation. Somehow, Lebanese people tried to protect themselves from the trauma of civil war by remembering pre-Civil War days, the heydays. But I explained in the beginning of the interview that those heydays were because of a certain economic situation. It's not something that comes automatically with the country. It's something that happened, and the country could not maintain it. So for me, this transformation is very important, and since I'm aware of it and I'm doing the work, it's automatically, because it comes from my world, it's automatically able to transform, whether in the ways I show it or the things I accept to be done to it. For me, it's not a problem, so then it will reflect on the work. But it is about transformation.